Where do you stream to?
YouTube.
YouTube.
We're now
Oh, okay.
live on YouTube, everyone. Woohoo. Okay, I'm just gonna go through the usual rituals that we have. So welcome. Before we get started, I'd like to mention that we are currently streaming live on YouTube. We will be screenshotting and saving some photos of this session, taking some photos. You are welcome to do the same. And who's talking?
I think it's your YouTube that you just need to mute.
No, I
Oh.
don't think that was me, but it's okay. Yes, so what I was saying, yes, so we will be screenshotting and you are welcome to do the same. We are also going to be posting on Instagram, LinkedIn, all the social media, and the only place that we really, really ask you to not record is if we have breakout rooms and backstage, please not record there, but everything else is fine. And I'd like to say welcome to all of our participants today and our community, new or old. So who are we? We're hungry learners, clumsy innovators, cheeky co-creators, changemakers, compassionate facilitators, ignorance experimentalists. And if you have a different label, feel free to put it in the chat or tell us. What is our motto? Our motto is failing forward. There is no other way. So please remember this is a safe space for everyone. Please be kind, be nice, be empathetic. We are an experimental space. I will pass the mic to Anupa now. Anupa?
Yeah, so hello everyone. I just want to start by saying is that so in today's day and age, some of us, not maybe most of us, are embracing this new identity ecosystem behavior in the digital world, whether as an as an organization or just as a person or as a collective. And with that comes just not the behavior and the interaction, but it comes with a lot more that what do we need, how do we function. There is this whole area of like governance and ownership, and how do we imagine ourselves within this space, because just functioning on our own isn't enough, and that's where you need some sort of like framework and policy. And that's what Phil is going to be talking to us about today. So over to you, Phil. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Good morning from San Francisco, California. Let me just share my screen here. Oop. So, yes, this talk slash mini workshop is called Reimagining Policy in the Metaverse. It starts off with, well, let me first introduce myself. My name is Phil Balagtas. I'm the founder of a global community called Speculative Futures, and a nonprofit here in San Francisco called Design Futures Initiative. We have chapters in over 80 cities around the world. I've been doing that for about the last 7 years. I founded the community, and it's all around futures thinking. How do we think about the future? I've since left that organization. I have my own consultancy called Habitat now, consulting full-time on training people how to look at the future through innovation lens, through strategy. And as we talk about the future products and services, whether it's the near-term future or the far future, 5, 10 years, 20 years and beyond, we always have to think about policies. But as designers, we're not necessarily taught about what policies are. We know they exist, and we're not always part of that process. So what I'm going to attempt to explain to you is to unravel this really crazy term policy, which most people think only refers to laws or government services, which is typically what we call public policy, right? But the word policy kind of generically exists all over the place. You might think of them as terms and conditions, procedures, product guidelines, laws. There's all kinds of written legalese policies, and there's also unwritten policies. And these are the way that we operate as a society. Cultural, ethical policies, how you operate in your team, in your group, in your family, all kinds of different places that, our policy for how we design or our morals or ethical values, those are all policies as well. But policies are intended to facilitate a service, answer questions, or dictate processes. It's got a lot of function around it, right? It tells you what happens when there's a problem, how to fix the problem, who to call, when and how the service can be terminated. We might call those terms of services. How money is made, our policy for how we make money, how we create products, how we operate, our rights, your rights, all that stuff is wrapped up into policy. This is a much deeper talk that I've given at a few different conferences now. So forgive me if this is a bit brief, and please ask questions either in the chat or just call out if you're lost. You can see here, I forgot to take this off. I just did this talk at the Service Design Conference earlier this year. So a couple of ways policies can exist are terms and conditions, and a couple of ways of how policies can also be broken. GameStation, I can't remember when this was, but they changed their terms and conditions on their website. Oh, in 2010, it says here, you agree to grant us a non-transferable option to claim for now and forevermore your immortal soul. They changed this on April Fool's Day, and 7,500 online shoppers accidentally sold their souls to GameStation. So this was just a joke, but it can show you just how, and you also know through the Facebook debacle, Cambridge Analytica, how privacy policies can really impact the way people use your information. So be careful on all the things that you sign off on. GDPR, of course, everyone knows these little pop-up windows whenever you go to a new website. This is mandatory, again, instantiated from the Facebook debacle. This is a form of policy. And I'll show you later that this is actually a really good example to show you the layers of policy that can be embedded inside a simple little pop-up window like this. This is a hand soap dispenser that does not dispense soap for skin of darker color. So the policy of the product group that allowed this to go out into the world, that allowed the non-inclusive research and testing for the simple soap dispenser, there's a lot of policies that allow this this thing to get out in the world. So these are operational product policies as well. How we operate as a group and what we say goes or doesn't go. So we did a lot of research. We talked to product designers, lawyers in Capitol Hill. We talked to people at the UN, and we tried to extract, is there a framework or a process that people are using for writing policy today? And what are the layers of policy that exist? And we found across the board, fashion, healthcare, public policy, UX guidelines, they all sort of have these three layers kind of generically. The foundational layer exists of laws and codes, state laws, country laws, all that stuff that allow you to exist as a business or as a product. These are the things that have been kind of embedded into your product based on historical precedents. If something in the past has happened, they've had to create a new rule or new law so that does not happen again. That's the foundation. Sometimes it can be changed. Sometimes it's really difficult to change, but it's usually something that's kind of based on history. On top of that are organizational business layer policies. These are the policies that you might have to create for a new product. They kind of they say business goals, stakeholder needs, the business's cultural and values, their research procedures, all of that stuff. And then on top of that is the interaction layer. And I'll show you how that exists in terms of the GDPR window. This simple window has a foundational layer, which is the required statement by GDPR to talk about their cookies are being used on the site. Then as a business, whoever owns this website or service probably has to put exactly how they use that data. This is the business layer. These are either sometimes created or borrowed from another model. And then the interaction layer is this window that we design. Typically, that's when we get it. We have to design the pop-up window. We decide when it happens, what it looks like, all that stuff, the user interface. So generically, most policies include those two layers and then have some sort of way that we interact with it. Even a sign on the door. During COVID, a sign on a window that says no mask, no service is a form of a policy dictated by the CDC, an institution And then the store owner is the one who actually has to design that sign and put it on the window. And then we interact with that sign by looking at it and entering the store. Hope that makes sense. So, we've come up with another framework of trying to apply a design-led approach to policymaking, because what we found when we interviewed all these different people is that there really isn't a common process across the board. Usually it's legal who's involved. They're writing the legalese or maybe editing it. Product management might be involved. But typically designers are not really in that process, because what are we going to do? We're not really writers, but we can be involved in that process, and I'll show you how. Because policy design is a design problem. Just by applying a simple, human-centered design thinking, however you want to call it, process to to the process of policymaking, we might be able to have a little bit more robust view on what the policy is. So starting with a very inclusive and diverse discovery phase, and we're going to practice this later on after the talk, and then really thinking about what the policy strategy is, who does it affect, how does it actually play out over many years, does it actually reflect society's values or a business's values, and then design that content so it's readable, not just having a bunch of legalese that no one understands and people just kind of click through because it's at a college level and they don't really want to spend the time to read it. And designing the interaction layer and reiterating that as you deploy it into the world, kind of piloting it and testing it in the field and making sure that the policy actually works as designed, and then changing it if it doesn't. So as we start to talk about the metaverse, I like to show this video. It's not the metaverse. This is an augmented reality world. It's a video by Keiichi Matsuda called Hyper Reality, and it traces a woman's path walking through an augmented reality world. She's got AR glasses on, but you can also see how this could be a metaversal world. Lots of advertisement and she's got apps that she has to log into, and it's pretty crazy. But we can see this is how it could play out also in the metaverse. If you're not familiar with metaverse, it's based on Web 3.0. So the key technologies in Web 3.0 or principles is Web 3 uses cryptocurrency, artificial intelligence, personal intelligence searches in the semantic web. It's really about personal data control and ownership, trying to bypass the giant tech companies such as Facebook and Google. And of course, VR, AR, virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality are the devices that you might be using to get into the metaverse. Of course, Facebook's Meta. Well, Meta's the metaverse world that Meta, guys, great. It's so meta. Meta's metaversal world is called Horizons. I think it might be called Open Horizons. I think it's just called Horizons. And that Horizons is the metaverse that you would access through the Oculus that Meta has created. So Web 3.0 is decentralized. Web 3 data is stored in blockchain, so no single system has access to it at all. It's dispersed across multiple platforms. It facilitates decentralized access and increased chances of failure. It's secure. Web 3.0 is more secure since decentralization makes it more difficult for hackers to target specific databases, and it's permissionless in that anyone, both users and suppliers, can participate without authorization from a governing body. I still believe that once the metaverse is fully created, there will be some sort of centralization. I mean, you can't really avoid it. Someone's going to create a product or service in the metaverse, and they're going to become the king of that product or service. But Web 3.0 stands to correct everything that we failed at in Web 2.0 and all of the control that we've given to large companies. But I still believe that we're going to be facing the same problems down the road. Any questions? Okay. So the metaverse.
Danny has his hand up.
Something to say, Danny.
Sure, go ahead.
Danny, you're on mute.
Still can't hear you. Well, I can keep going and you can work on your audio, Danny.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll keep going. So the metaverse does exist today. Okay. And it exists in mostly games such as Roblox and Fortnite and Animal Crossing. Those are the three big ones that are sort of that are metaversal worlds. They were originally designed as game worlds, but in there you can do lots of different stuff. And there's lots of cultural phenomenons that are happening today in metaversal worlds, such as, well, this one happened in February of 2019. The DJ Marshmello had his first in-game concert.
Check this out.
So on February 2nd, Fortnite had its best event day ever with 10.7 million players. That didn't look like 10.7 million players, but 10.7 million players showed up for the Marshmello concert. The first event of its kind at that at scale of users attending it through a game platform. The next one that became very popular was Travis Scott. He brought in April of 2020 over 12.3 million concurrent players for his in-game concert. He, of course, has been canceled recently because of his the tragedy at his concert. When Biden and Harris were campaigning, they actually created a presidential campaign in Animal Crossing. Animal Crossing is a product of Nintendo, and this is really interesting. This is what one of their little campaign houses look like. But shortly after, Nintendo changed their policies, their usage guidelines. This is directly from Animal Crossing's usage guidelines. You can see here it says, please do not leverage the game as a marketing platform that directs people to activities or campaigns outside the game, including directing people to sales page, coupons, sweepstakes, giveaways, all that stuff. So they basically changed their policy to disallow political campaigns in Animal Crossing. But lots of other things were changed as well. You can see this. So these are the usage guidelines. This is Animal Crossing's policy for users. Refrain from using the game inappropriately or creating any content within the game that would be considered vulgar. Please do not share false information. So there's some standard stuff here that, of course, you know, they understood they had to put a rule around. There was a research avatar that was sexually assaulted on Metaverse. And so Meta actually had to create personal boundaries. They had to create a new policy for personal boundaries based on 4 feet, the 4-foot rule, to disallow harassment. Also, they created this thing called voice mode. So if you were trying to talk to someone that was not your friend and they didn't know you, your voice would be garbled until you actually became friends. So they could try to talk to you all they want and try to surround you and harass you, but you wouldn't understand anything they're saying. So that was an interesting feature they changed. The Gap, PacSun, and Nike have all created stores within the Roblox platform. So these are stores you can actually go in, you can buy digital products with Roblox money. And I think you can actually put up your own store and actually make money as well. The Gap, I think, is the one that you can actually create your own store and create and actually start to create income. Forever 21 also created their own store. So, I mean, it looks like I don't play Roblox, but they look like Legos to me. So this might be exciting for some people, especially the younger generation. Roblox, I think, is typically like ages 12 to 14, mostly younger generation. Fortnite is for a little bit older kids. So each of these platforms have their own features, their own kind of style, their own way of marketing, their own types of products directed specifically at those age groups. And this is something to keep in mind for the exercise later, because we're going to be working with a service created by Nintendo for teens. So what are the implications around creating a service for teens? What are the kind of policies we have to think about? What are the kind of things that could go wrong? And how do we put up rules to kind of protect the business and our community and our users and other businesses and other brands? So what if the metaverse is not just about Meta's VR Horizons world? What if it actually becomes more about traversing the digital and physical worlds, AR and VR. It's not purely inside of a headset. What are the future of internet is not necessarily about the tech and ownership, but an invisible set of behaviors that continue to dynamically create and redefine boundaries, technology, commerce, and social cultural phenomenons. We are all afraid of the metaverse because of having to be locked inside of this virtual world. But we should really be thinking about what are the community behaviors that could also erupt and change, and what are the opportunities there and the threats to those environments. And what if the metaverse is not necessarily about virtual reality or immersion within technology, but really about how we are evolving with the technology? There's so many complaints about what the metaverse's problems might be. We're not really looking at the positive side of like, well, what could we actually stand to gain from having a world like this? And I know Facebook is trying very, very hard to show you that through their commercials, but they're not doing very well. I know that their Horizons world doesn't have many active users at the moment. So the value proposition there is kind of weak, but we should really think about like how do we make that a much stronger value proposition so that we can get a lot out of this type of world. So consider this, futures thinking is imperative. We have to keep thinking about the future to understand what could happen, both threats and opportunities, and how do we prepare for that? Policy design is going to be critical, especially when we're working with children or working with our private data. We really want to reduce harm, reduce friction, and create value for our users. And again, thinking about communities and the behaviors, and not focus so much on the technology part. A few books you might be interested in that are policy related. Deliberate Intervention just came out on Rosenfeld. Design Justice, of course, is a really good book. And Speculative Futures, Design Approaches to Navigate Change, Foster Resilience, and Co-Create the Cities We Need, just came out by Joanna Hoffman. This is a very good futures book if you're interested. So I'll stop there before we move into Mural and see if maybe Danny's audio is working, if you want to ask a question. No question. Oh, okay, I see. Great. Are there any questions from anyone on policy, generically what policy is, or Web 3.0 in the metaverse? Do we all get it? We all understand what the metaverse is now, right?
Hey, Phil.
Hey.
Jason.
Hey, Jason. Good.
So I have a question for you. Friendly question, by the way, not a challenging question. So I've always wondered about policy because, especially like you had a really interesting slide in the very beginning where you talked about layers.
Yeah.
And one of the I feel like one of the fundamental problems of policy is that it becomes extremely overwhelming and extremely complex.
Exactly.
And when we think about designing for policy, how can we think about it from like both a sustainable and like a recyclable standpoint? And I'll give you an example because I don't know if people follow like Elon Musk and stuff, but when Elon Musk was asked kind of like, hey, if we're going to go colonize Mars, what kind of policies would be put into place? And basically he had this perspective of like throwing everything out the window. And like, he's saying like, actually less laws is better, like not having so many in place. But I was just curious, like your perspective on that in terms of when we're thinking about going into the metaverse and like we're thinking about going into more of these complex environments, like what is the real approach that we should be thinking about taking in terms of policy? Because we tend to like get under a lot of complexity today, and it ends up being like, I think many people, when they go to a website or a service, it's just this gargantuan list of stuff and no one wants to read.
Yep. Well, the problem is that we're not invited to the table to talk about that to begin with, because why, like I said earlier, like why would we have any say in the legalese? But what we should be really advocating for is being part of that process and trying to understand it. Usually policy, when you're creating any sort of new product or service, there are policies that are already written for similar services that you borrow. You assess if they're the right ones to apply to your service, and then you change them if you have to, but there's some things that can't change. But you should at least understand it, right? Like every single product, even existing as a citizen in your state, you have to adhere to policies. So why would you just slap something on there and not really understand what it means for your stakeholders or your users? And if we could at least get in the room and try to understand like what its impact is, what does this mean? What's its impact for our users? How does it change the way that we have to design the product? And do it through a structured, rigorous process, we can start to at least get an understanding of what that is. I mean, I can't talk to you about Elon Musk and Mars, but I'm pretty sure that they'll be borrowing from, some place of like, how do we stand up a financial system? How do we stand up just like a citizen system and all that stuff?
We've got 2 questions in the chat. One is by Howard. Howard, do you want to talk about it, or should I just read it out?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Phil. Thanks for the presentation. I was just curious to know who would be your core stakeholders when it comes to co-creating policies for the metaverse.
It would depend what your product is. Who are your core stakeholders when designing any product? If it's and I think the user would be a stakeholder as well. So your users, your community that you're serving, the people involved with the business. I don't necessarily think that you would have to involve people from the government, but you'd have to involve legal. Legal is a stakeholder, because if they have to change a policy, they might be the ones who know how it can be changed. But I hate to say it depends, because that's kind of a vague answer, but it really does on what your product is. And we'll look at that here in a second with the mural exercise.
Cool, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Would you like to take more questions? We have a few in the chat.
I could take one more. Yeah, I could take one more maybe.
I believe Deepshika asked, what are your thoughts on regulatory sandboxes? How could we as designers, facilitators be engaged in that process and co-create with the government?
I don't know what a regulatory sandbox is.
Deepshika, would you like to?
Yeah, so I think for Web 3.0, especially governments are coming up with sandboxes where they engage with different startups working on that technology for a period of time. And over there, they monitor the real impact of the policies. And so they are co-creating with them.
Okay, that sounds great. I mean, a sandbox to test policy sounds like a brilliant idea, right? Like, why we should be doing that with everything. I think we sort of accept that some policies can't be changed, and we don't realize that we can actually test them in the world to see if they hold up or if things break. And, we should treat policymaking like product design, that it can break and we can fix it. Not that like, oh, we can't fix it. This is how it has to be. And this is how we have to move forward. That's how we've gotten into the problems that we've been in today. It's like no one's questioned these things. And that's when we get into a lot of trouble. And how can we as designers, facilitators be engaged in that process and co-create with the government, advocate for it? I mean, I think this is part of this is just, my campaign that I've been fighting for over a year. I haven't really created the impact that I want. But I would really start to talk about this at every level within your institution and really kind of show the case study for like why we should be designing policy better, why we should be involved, and really kind of, fighting for that seat at the table. Okay. So, Mimp, would you invite everyone to the mural board?
Yes.
Yes. Warren and Danny, if you'd like to put your question in the chat. Oh, well, Warren already has question in the chat. But if you'd like to stay in the backstage, Phil can answer some more questions later.
Mm-hmm. So I'll be honest with you guys. This is a workshop that I've been thinking about for quite some time, and I've prototyped a little bit. But I think this is where I've landed today. It's open for iteration, so forgive me if there are any holes in the process, but it should be pretty easy to do. On a previous web jam, someone talked about the futures wheel. I don't know if you guys attended that session, but the futures wheel is a framework based on, you take an idea or an event or a trend, and you think about what are the implications, what could go wrong, or what could go right. If this, then that. This is sort of a similar exercise, and what we're going to do is we're going to write down an implication. Well, let me start with the actual product. So the speculative product here is Nintendo is creating a marketplace just for teens. Don't look too deeply into the idea here, but this is a good way to investigate it. This is let's say we're all coming to the table. We all work at Nintendo, and they pitch this idea. We're going to create a marketplace just for teens, 18 and below, and it's going to live inside of Meta's Horizon Worlds. Okay, it's going to be the Nintendo marketplace. Maybe something similar to Facebook Marketplace if you've ever used that before. And now we're going to have this very robust discovery process. We're going to ask all the really hard questions about what could go wrong. How could this marketplace impact our teens? And from a user perspective, from a product or business perspective, you could probably separate these two, but I put them into one category. From a system perspective, from the metaverse, how does this product, what are the implications of this product living inside of another brand's platform? And in that platform, how could it affect other services, other communities, or other brands? Should I lock this down? Oops. I say other communities, but we can look at that as other brands as well. How does Nintendo's marketplace operate with, let's say, Nike's marketplace or the Gap's marketplace, or in the entire metaverse together? So some questions. I put also Nintendo's brand values here. And the reason I'm using a brand is because as Nintendo, we know what Nintendo's values are, right? These are actually taken from their website. We know what a Nintendo product looks like. We've all probably played it at one point, or at least maybe you guys have kids that play it. I know I used Nintendo back in the 80s. But their brand values are uniqueness, flexibility, and sincerity. And it's always good to understand, like, if we're working at Nintendo, how does this product reflect our values through its policies as well? So some questions to ask yourself is like, how might users or groups use Nintendo products or services? What are the things that could go wrong? What are the implications? And here, what are the business and product implications? How does it create value? How do we create policies so that the product continues to create value and not lose money? Protect its IP? How does it play well with others? And yeah, so I put some examples here. And what we want to do is, and we can all just jump in here. And if you're not familiar with Miro, you can just double click on a sticky here and start to write. Like here, hackers could join. So we have to have a policy to protect from hackers. That's not the greatest pair here, but that's how you do it. Just double click on the sticky and type in the box. So what the exercise is meant to show you is to kind of really take the time to investigate all of the possibilities of what could go wrong or what could go well from different perspectives, so that we can start to figure out what are the policies that we need to investigate or create for this new service. So please, by all means, go ahead and start. There you go. Thanks. Typing away. I'll tell you, when I first started doing this exercise, it's a bit difficult because if you're a designer, it's kind of a change of context. You're not just thinking about the product and the end user anymore. You're thinking about, like, oh, how does the product work with other products or within a community? And this is a completely brand new world. I'll just play some music in the background here.
Yeah, and I think this has raised quite a few questions, not only for policies for the organization creating the policy, but like if we're looking at a decentralized, where everybody has the ownership and the voice, how does the policy kind of transcend from the individual who's using the product to the organization who's like selling the product? And
Right.
This would definitely be very important for like kids. I don't know, can kids even like sign up on their own into, or do they need like a parent?
I think my friend's kids use Roblox, and they're always asking him for credits to buy money. You can sign up. They definitely can sign up on their own, but I think for getting things like currency, you need parental guidance on that. But yeah, I mean, I didn't say what future this would be, but I mean, this could be 5 years down the road. It could be 10 years down the road, probably much sooner, because Metaverse is coming.
So Phil, would you consider implications as triggers and then the policy follows to address that trigger?
You consider implications as a trigger. When I say implications, like what could happen? What are the implications of this product being, living, like what could go wrong? And I think it's usually more helpful to say what can go wrong. Usually when you do kind of an implication mapping, you can say anything. But for this exercise, since we don't have a lot of time, maybe just think about what could go wrong, because those are usually the places you need rules. When you think about
implications as problem scenarios, for example.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Cool.
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah. So let's just take a few
within
minutes.
Different quadrants. All right. Cool.
Yes. Right.
Thank you.
You guys are doing great. We'll just go on for like a few more minutes, and then we'll walk around the Post-its and we'll talk about them.
Yeah. So Phil, I was just curious in regards to decentralization of the metaverse, right? So if Facebook owns what do you call this, Horizon?
Yeah.
So technically it is centralized by them, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. It's a bit confusing. I mean, the general principle of decentralization, again, is meant to unravel and unwind and remove power from these major governing bodies. It just stands to fix all of that stuff by principle. But again, there will be governing bodies that are creating the metaverse, just like Roblox itself as a platform is a governing body, and it's a huge one. You know.
And it's funny that you had mentioned that metaverse are initially organically emerging from gaming systems like Sony and Nintendo, but technically they are centralized as well within their eShop, within their Sony PlayStation Store. So if they do decide to pull out a game, it does not exist in your library anymore, or technically in the cloud. It's something around that context. So yeah. But cool. It just got me thinking onto how does it really work as decentralized.
Yeah, it took me a minute to kind of get my head wrapped around what Web3 offers, and I did a bunch of research. But you know, here's an example of what's coming with Web3. Today, people are searching for content very differently. The creator economy is the king of right now. You know, the newest generation, the Alpha generation and the Gen Zs are using TikTok and YouTube to search for content over Google. Now, instead of having websites, these formal websites with content on it, the content is coming from creators. So it's decentralizing it from these large institutions, and they're the ones that are providing the content now to the rest of the world. That's very similar to what this decentralization aspect is.
Interesting.
And then all the other things like artificial intelligence, VR, AR, these other key supporting technologies are just technologies that are there, just like the browser or the computer are technology to access it. These other things are the facilitators, the enablers to getting into Web3.
Yeah, and I'd like to add one thing is that one thing that is really coming up very significantly is like the emergence of internet communities in clusters, which are technically also at some point forming their own organizations called like decentralized autonomous organizations. So, you know, what Bill is talking about today is very important. And it's something that I also grapple with because I'm also in the process of building something like that. So does the centralization come from the community itself? And the people governing that, you know, that body, do they make the policies which would become, you know, for the people, by the people? And then in the larger scheme of thought, would they be the ones saying, then it would become centralized again, because it's like these clusters of community governing their, you know, own policies and then telling people what to do. So I think there's a lot of space for conversation around that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you guys did great. I'm going to go through and talk about some of the stuff. And I see that Bernard here has been working in policy design for over 40 years. So yeah, it's great to see this topic starting to emerge, and more people from a design community are talking about this now. There's a lot of policy design work already going on in government, in healthcare. As design thinking and service design becomes more popular, we are being invited more to the table, but there's still a lot more work to do for us to become. I believe the future of design will include policymaking, that there will become policy designers. This will become a real role where we are involved at every step of the process. So let's look at some of the comments you guys made. So online bullying appears and continues, of course. So we have to have a policy describing what behavior is tolerated, whether it's creating the distance or the garbled voice like Facebook has created. Bullying, humans behaving badly always exist in new platforms, right? When Alexa first, sorry, she's going to start. when Amazon Echo first came out, we saw lots of children screaming at them. We see when robots start to appear in public, people were kicking them, and people just love to behave badly for some reason. So we've got to think about all the bad behaviors and put up policies for that. Influence other users' opinion based on fake news, of course. So we should have a policy that is to say that everything has to be verified and checked. Originally, the idea here that I was going to give you was something that came out of another workshop, was a product that verifies all of the information for kids, so that if they see any sort of information or they meet another user. There's a stamp system, like a badge system that will allow them to verify, is this person real? Are they nefarious? Can I trust their content? All that kind of stuff. But I thought that might be too specific. Okay, so they can overspend on things, could misuse their parents' credit card without permission. That happens today. So a policy is to cap the max amount that could be spent. Great. Educators might use this to engage and teach. Great. So this is a positive implication. So do we have an educational use policy for the Nintendo store? Anything else over here? Okay, so let's move over to the product and business. Illegal digital money could be used. So we have to have policy against legal assessment of money and transactions. Fake Nintendo products are sold in the metaverse. Yeah, that's a good one. No use of a brand without any kind of digital certificate. Awesome. Learning can be in many more ways. To agree what is good education or learning, and ditching this too. Perhaps we do not need any certification of what we learn and apply. Thank you. Trust. So we should have policy for identities, a policy for transparency, to certify transparency. Copyright protection. Of course, products can be easily copied, or can they be? Or maybe we create a policy so that products can be copied, but they have some kind of protection, copyright protection, that allows them to do it while still giving credit back to Nintendo. Maybe we actually make that a business opportunity. So you start to see here how the policies implications, they're very different, right? From a product or business level, you want to scale, expand, make money, provide lots of opportunities for this product to become successful. From the user perspective, you want to protect also. Of course, you want to actually facilitate them using the service so that they're successful in using the service, but you also want to think about all the ways that they could be harmed so you can create policies to protect them. Users could consume a lot of bandwidth that interferes with operations. So a bandwidth, that's a good one, bandwidth consumption policy. Moving into the metaverse, there's some good ones here. So some of these we had talked about. So everybody have a voice, have a voting system. Great. If something needs to be changed within the Nintendo marketplace, we have a voting system, a policy that's a democratized environment, policy against bullying and cyber abuse, implications of financial transactions, so safeguarding the user as a seller and a buyer, even maybe external market hits like a bear market. Yeah, very good. What are the linkages with outside information services? So information services policy, yep, that's a good one. Be a good example by being transparent. Yeah, we mentioned this in the other one on the development of good policy. Policy that describes an experimental zone, deep secret sandbox perhaps, rules how to transfer that to the system metaverse, rules how to stop experiments in the transfer. Yeah, right. So by being a good example, being transparent about how we dictate policies as well. Implication of digital products to be portable in different metaverses. Yeah, that's a good one. So policy interoperability across various metaverses. Yep. So if we want to create maybe a Nintendo marketplace within, I don't know, another universe, how do we actually port that over and still retain the core features and values of the product? The change of metaverse rules. So if the metaverse rules changes, how does it affect our marketplace? So policy that reviews the changes to benefit the majority. You guys are so smart. These are really great. A policy that reviews the changes to benefit the majority of the users, right? And also continue to think about democracy here. And so moving on to how does our marketplace play well with others or not play well with others? System thinking policies. How might we make an open-ended, inclusive policy? What are transnational implications in civil military relations? Wow, okay. Would we need to create some sort of communication, collaboration pipeline or forum to address that, which we can predict? Yeah, exactly. I didn't think about the civil military part. I don't know how that changes for teams using this, but yeah, there could be some implications there. Metaverse is the only marketplace and becomes monopoly. Okay, now that's a really interesting implication, right? We need to encourage the creation of other marketplaces, right? That's the decentralization also. Like what happens when you get to that point where it's like, okay, they're hoarding everything. And of course, we don't know what we don't know. Create private policy like the academic W3C, IEEE consortium. Yeah, exactly. It's a Wild West. The metaverse is going to be the Wild West for a while. Of course, they're going to be borrowing from what's happening already, borrowing from policies already created in Roblox, Animal Crossing, learning from that and porting that over into their metaverse. But we should really be looking at that before we just, transfer everything over. What happens when someone from a different universe gets injured? Wow, interesting. Yeah, we would need to create a legal framework to transit across boundaries. Yeah, so what if they're like, maybe they use one of the products bought at the Nintendo marketplace in another universe and create some kind of harm to another user? How do we deal with that? How do employees and employees for other brands interact? So a model policy for employer use. I don't know. Like a Nintendo marketplace is probably going to be unmanned, probably AI driven, but there's probably still customer service representatives, right? Humans behind a phone or something. The government is going to be happy about releasing control authority. How might we appease the government's inherent nature to protect and serve? All right, how do we keep the government in or out of Nintendo marketplace? What is it? What exactly is in that foundational layer that we can change or cannot change? There's probably policies for how any retail store operates within an American product. So Meta being an American product, Nintendo being a Japanese product, there's probably a policy for how products from other countries operate within a US based system. Metaverse exchange, new metaverse trade laws. Yeah. So how do you kind of trade within the metaverse? So that's pretty much it. That's the exercise, guys. I would appreciate some feedback. I think my contact is up here in the top left. Connect with me on LinkedIn. It just says, well, look me up on LinkedIn. You guys have my name, but let me know how this was for you, because again, I'm sort of prototyping this. You guys did excellent, by the way, and came up with a lot of really good perspectives. And I'd like to create a much longer workshop out of this and really get people to think about also terms of use, terms and conditions, and all the different layers and how we might want to actually, I want to actually have an exercise where we're actually redesigning a piece of policy, looking at a big chunk of legalese and investigating, like, what does this mean for our users for long term, and how do we rewrite it, and how do we create the interaction layer so people understand what it is at the moment when they need to understand what it is and feel safe using it. So I have a lot of ideas for how this could expand. Any other questions?
Yeah, I do have one, Phil, and I feel so doubtful to ask her, because the stuff is quite difficult to wrap your head around it, and feeling you offer us something new to think about and to play with, and at the same time I want to go to that zone, but
yes,
the present, what you know now is really dragging me back into the mud. I don't know the English word.
Yeah, I know exactly how you feel.
So while you are inviting us to come to your zone, actually, I am thinking about, what is this with policy? Why do we have this old concept of policy? What? Mm-hmm. So have you any thoughts to share with us? How did you go through this question, or?
Yeah, and again, as a futurist, we are always thinking about future products and services, but people always say, like, oh, there's a policy attached to that. A policy is necessary for that thing to exist in the future world. Maybe it's like a trade policy or a regulatory policy, and I have no idea what that is. And I always ask the question, like, okay, what is that policy? And then once I start to open up the box and be like, oh wow, there's a bunch of rules and conditions for how this thing is supposed to behave, I start asking myself, like, well, why can't that be designed so that I understand it? And as a user, when there's a problem, we think about T's and C's all the time and GDPR, because we interact with them, but we never do anything about it. And that's how we got into the problem in the first place with our private data being used for what I call nefarious purposes to influence an election, because we don't understand it well enough. So why can't we? Why can't we design things better? And it's very much a big black box for me. I don't understand half of the stuff that becomes a policy, but we should. And that is the drive that you have to understand complex problems, because we have the tool set and we should be trying to tackle those things.
And you are going forward in time, while I feel to understand this, I need to go backward in time. So just to perhaps you have seen it or others. So was there any time in our human history that we did not need rules to interact with each other?
Prehistoric times, maybe. I mean, we've created rules since the beginning of time, since like we've understood, like, you know, been conscious, right? We had rules for how we lived in villages, in families.
More backward. I feel go more backward.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's again the unwritten policies of how we interact as societies, as species exist. Now that's, I mean, I know that's getting very like meta.
I do understand you. Suddenly I do understand you again.
Right. So we can design, you are designing policies how your family interacts with each other, like at Thanksgiving, like there's no politics, no talk about politics. Those kind of things are things that can be designed. When you start to think about policies as rules that exist all around us, that we have to operate within, you can start to think about like, I have agency to design that in a better way. And this is what I'm talking about. It is a giant black box for a lot of us, but it doesn't mean that we should just be like, okay, it's too complicated. I'm just going to walk over here. You just give me this stuff, and we can continue down that path if we want. But we've seen where that gets us.
I think like, so I know Phil a little bit, and like I've done a little bit of features as well. I think what's interesting to me, there's a little bit of laziness that goes on with policy, and maybe incompetence. And I say that in the general sense because maybe people just don't want to deal with this. But to date, I feel like it's a reactive situation, right? So you don't really address policy until something has gone wrong. And what Phil is basically introducing is, if we apply foresight into this, this is actually the opportunity to leapfrog over those things before they go wrong. So in a sense, like from a business standpoint, this is a risk mitigation tactic, right? It's basically saying, hey, if you can quantify what can go wrong and say plausibly what potentially something plausibly can go wrong in the next year or two, like you're going to save yourself that money. And a lot of it comes down to like inclusivity issues, accessibility issues, all that kind of stuff, like things that a lot of times like the business doesn't really like to take into account until something actually happens, because it's not about revenue or retention, right? It's about like, hey, like someone can blast us with like this big lawsuit or class action lawsuit. So I think what's really interesting, and like what Phil's saying, is that like these tools are like great to kind of anticipate what those future implications are or scenarios are, and allow us to plan better. So I like praise Phil for bringing all this stuff up.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Phil. I'm just going to interrupt you just for a moment. We can go back into the conversation, because what Jason said about risk mitigation in something like this is very imperative before, designing a community, because that's what the metaverse is doing, right? Bringing groups of people together. So Union, will you just quickly introduce next week's session so we can stop YouTube and go back to this lovely conversation that we're having?
Of course I can. Yes, what will 2023 look like together? Woo! How will that be? I think there's more meta and there's more verse. For sure, I know that. But there's also a lot we don't know. And let's try to figure out that together. Next week, the facilitators will be Serena, Mim, myself, Colin, and Hugo. It will be high-paced, interactive, serious fun again. So in that session, please join us and bring a carrot.
A carrot.
Ooh, yes, very meta, very verse, Phil. Please do join us.
Okay.
So that will be next week.
I also want to mention that this will be our last session of the year. So please join. We would like to see all of you before we start the new year together. And on that note, I would like us to say goodbye to YouTube and go to backstage. Goodbye, YouTube. Wave goodbye, everyone.